Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Raymond. I'm 38 years old, and if you passed me on the street in downtown Denver, you'd probably think I was just a regular guy, maybe the kind who works a stable 9 to 5, has a few hobbies, and lives a quiet life. You'd be wrong. I run a private investment firm. I'm the guy behind a half-dozen tech startups you've definitely read about, but I don't flaunt it. I wear simple shirts, drink black coffee, and I drive a car that doesn't attract attention. I like it that way. Success, to me, has never been about being flashy. It's about security, peace, respect. And maybe that's why my in-laws, the Winthrops, never saw me coming. When I married Helena Winthrop, I knew what I was stepping into. Her family comes from old East Coast money, a dynasty built on industry and legacy. To them, names meant everything. Reputation wasn't just important, it was a weapon. And me? I was a nobody from Colorado with a dream, a laptop, and a dorm room startup that hadn't even cracked 6 figures yet. I loved Helena, and still do. But her father, Charles Winthrop, has spent every year of our marriage treating me like I was a stain on the family crest. A nuisance. An embarrassment. A freeloader. He never saw the 14-hour workdays, the missed birthdays because I was in Tokyo or Berlin chasing venture deals, or the nights I came home to Helena too tired to speak but still managed a kiss on her forehead. He never asked. He just assumed. I tried to ignore it for years. To keep the peace. For Helena. Until last Christmas. That night, the Winthrops' Christmas Gala, was supposed to be just another quiet night of me keeping a low profile in the corner of their marble ballroom, sipping scotch and pretending not to hear their passive-aggressive jabs. But that's not what happened. It started with an invitation I didn't receive. The Winthrops throw a black-tie Christmas party every year. Denver's elite attend. Politicians, CEOs, media moguls. Helena always gets an invite. But this year, mine never arrived. Raymond, Helena said one morning, hesitant, Dad said this year's guest list is being kept small. Just close family. I didn't flinch. I'd been down this road before. I'm not family. You know what he meant, she said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded. Said nothing. I didn't want to make her choose. But the truth was, I did get an invite, just not from the Winthrops. It came from Gabriel Lancaster, a billionaire venture capitalist and mentor of mine. He called me directly, Ray, I need you at this event. There's someone I want you to meet. Big deal, government-level biotech. I was on the fence, until I saw the venue. The Winthrop Mansion. My father-in-law had no idea Gabriel and I were even close. And certainly no idea that the man his company had been desperately courting for months was someone who respected me more than any of his board members. Still, I said yes. I showed up to their mansion in a midnight black Armani tux, walking alongside Gabriel like an equal, because I was one. Charles Winthrop saw me before I saw him. He was on a stage, mid-speech, entertaining 100 high society guests. He stopped. Blinked. Then smiled. Ah, he said, voice booming, even the freeloaders know where the free booze is. Laughter exploded around the room. I froze. My blood burned, but my face stayed stone cold. Gabriel's grip tightened on my shoulder. Ray, he said under his breath, now might be a good time to remind this room exactly who you are. I didn't say anything. Not right away. The room erupted in laughter again, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and velvet-draped walls like a slap to the face. I stood there in that tailored tuxedo, the silk collar suddenly feeling like a noose. Charles Winthrop, my father-in-law, just called me a freeloader in front of Denver's most powerful people. And no one blinked. Not Helena, who I caught in the corner of the ballroom frozen like a statue. Not her mother, who merely raised her champagne glass. No one came to my defense. Except one man. Gabriel Lancaster took a step forward, clinking his glass sharply against the marble fireplace. "Freeloader," he said with a calmness that silenced the room. Funny. I didn't realize the man behind 3 of my most successful ventures was a freeloader. The room shifted. The atmosphere snapped from amusement to confusion. "Raymond here," Gabriel continued, "was the only person who warned me about the last tech bubble before it burst. He saved me more money than most of you have ever seen. So if he's a freeloader, then I suppose I owe my entire portfolio to a man living off scraps." The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at Charles Winthrop, and he looked back at me like he had swallowed glass. Still, even with that vindication, I felt hollow. Because Helena didn't speak. After the party, I slipped away early. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want an apology. I drove home alone, snow falling thick on the windshield, Denver glowing dim in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with messages from investors who had been at the party, suddenly interested in my work. But none of that mattered. What mattered was Helena. She came home late, wrapped in her designer shawl, smelling like the expensive perfume her mother always wore. Her cheeks were red, either from the cold or shame, I couldn't tell. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond. I should have said something. Still nothing. Dad crossed a line. I know. I froze. I stared at her for a long time before answering. "That's the second time," I said quietly. 5 years ago, at Thanksgiving, when your father called me a charity case. And now again tonight. How many times does he get to humiliate me before you find your voice?" She turned away, tears brimming. "I didn't ask you to fight him, Helena," I added. "Just stand next to me. That's all I've ever wanted." She sat on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "I married into a family that never wanted me," I continued, the words tasting bitter. "And you let them treat me like I was less than. But you know what's worse than being insulted by Charles Winthrop?" She looked up, eyes red and puffy. "Being invisible to you." The pain wasn't just from the public embarrassment. It was the years of swallowing my pride, enduring the condescension, and convincing myself it was for the greater good. For love. For peace. But peace, I was starting to realize, doesn't come from silence. It comes from being seen. From being respected. The days after the party felt like walking through ash. The burn was over, but the smoke still clung to everything. I didn't go back to the office right away. I needed time to think, time to pull the pieces of my dignity back together. Helena kept trying to mend the silence between us, but every time she opened her mouth, I saw her father's smirk instead. Then something unexpected happened. I got a call from Elena Parr, a respected journalist from the Denver Business Ledger, someone I'd worked with quietly in the past to push coverage for startups I'd backed. She didn't usually call me directly. "Raymond," she said, her voice low but intrigued, "I was at the Winthrop party." I paused. "You and half the city." She chuckled. "Sure. But only a few of us recognized you. You keep a low profile, don't you?" "I prefer results over applause." That's what I thought. "So here's the thing, I'm writing a profile piece." "About what?" "Not what." "Who?" "You." My throat went dry. "Why?" "Because half the investors in the room were asking who the hell you were, and the other half were Googling you under the table after Lancaster dropped your name like a live grenade." I stayed quiet. "And here's the kicker," she added, her voice sharpening. I dug around. "Raymond, the Winthrop family has no idea what you've built. Your name isn't listed on any of your companies. You've used holding firms, trusts, partners, but never your own name. I blinked. That was the point. Well, the world's about to find out, she said. Unless you want to stop me. I leaned back in my chair. Why would I stop you? Elena paused. Because it's going to humiliate your in-laws. The title is probably going to read something like, The Billion-Dollar Ghost in Denver's Elite Family. It'll make Charles look like a fool for calling you a freeloader. You okay with that? I didn't even need to think. Let them burn. That article hit the front page within 72 hours. It was brutal. Unknown son-in-law quietly built a tech empire while Winthrops looked the other way. Meet Raymond Caldwell, the financial strategist behind 3 unicorn startups. Ignored, insulted, invisible, until now. The calls started pouring in. Private equity firms. CEOs I hadn't heard from in years. Even international venture groups wanted to talk. But the one call that surprised me most. Gabriel Lancaster. Ray, he said, tone sharp but warm. I just pulled out of the Winthrop deal. I sat up straighter. What? I told Charles I'm not working with anyone who treats their own family like dirt. Told him the only reason I was even in that house was because of you. I swallowed. He's not going to take that well. Gabriel laughed. That's the idea. But that's not why I called. I waited. I've got something bigger. A federal project. Infrastructure meets biotech. It's going to change everything, and I want you running the fund. I nearly dropped the phone. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, he replied. And maybe, just maybe, consider showing the Winthrops who really holds the power now. And that's when it hit me. I'd spent years swallowing my pride, thinking I was powerless. But now, I had the leverage. The name. The spotlight. And most importantly, I had the story. Not a fabricated one. The truth. A truth that could do what silence never could, set the balance right. That night, as I lay beside Helena, both of us staring up at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. And I wasn't going to let Charles Winthrop humiliate me again. Something shifted in me after that night. For years, I had convinced myself that walking away from conflict was noble. That not fighting back made me stronger. But the truth? I had been hiding, cloaking myself in humility because I didn't believe I could win. But now, I saw the board. And for the first time, I realized I held the winning hand. Charles Winthrop built his empire on one thing, reputation. Not merit. Not innovation. Reputation. But now my name was starting to carry more weight than his. That gave me an edge I planned to use with precision. It started with a list. I sat at my desk and began writing down every Winthrop business connection I had quietly come across over the years, banks, law firms, construction outfits, campaign donors, all the faces I had seen at their galas, charity functions, and country club mixers. I then cross-referenced that list with my current partnerships. To my surprise, and dark amusement, 12 of those contacts were directly tied to startups I'd either funded or advised. Some of them had even taken my calls over the years without realizing I was married to that Winthrop. These people respected me, not the family name. Next, I called Gabriel Lancaster. I'm going to make a move, I told him. He laughed. I was wondering when you'd say that. I need your backing. Quietly. You'll have it. We spent the next 3 weeks crafting what looked like a standard investment opportunity for a new fund, one that specialized in legacy companies needing restructuring, cash injections, and modernization. On paper, it had nothing to do with the Winthrops. But buried in the second phase was a targeted acquisition strategy, one that directly overlapped with Winthrop Holding suppliers and strategic partners. If the plan worked, I wouldn't just sideline Charles Winthrop, I'd slowly dismantle the very ecosystem he relied on. Meanwhile, I worked on the personal front. I met with a journalist friend at Forbes. I let him discover that I'd recently turned down several board seats from legacy institutions, including one from a company that Charles had desperately tried to buy into. He published an op-ed titled, "The Humble Power Broker, Why Raymond Caldwell Turned Down the Seat Your Father Would Kill For." That article trended for days. By the time February rolled around, I had quietly inserted myself into every conversation Charles Winthrop wanted to be in, and shut the door behind me. And yet, I wasn't done. I needed one final play. Something that wouldn't just bruise his ego, but strip away his mask in front of the very people he feared losing. That's when the opportunity presented itself like a perfectly served dish. The Winthrops were planning their annual spring investment luncheon, a curated gathering of high-level investors, philanthropists, and venture scouts. Helena mentioned it over breakfast one morning, barely looking up from her tea. "Dad's throwing the usual luncheon in March," she said. "He wants Gabriel there." I nodded. "What about me?" She hesitated. "I don't know. You're not on the list, but I'll talk to him." "No," I replied, setting my mug down. "Let me handle it." I made a single call, to Gabriel, and the following week, my name appeared on the invite list, this time as Gabriel Lancaster's featured guest. When Helena saw it arrive in the mail, she looked at me, confused. "You got invited?" I smiled. "Looks like someone finally noticed the freeloader." In the days leading up to the luncheon, I finalized my revenge. I had two goals. 1. Reveal my power. 2. Make Charles beg, without ever raising my voice. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to do what real power does best, make others bend without ever being touched. I had endured public humiliation. Now it was time for public reckoning. And every piece was in place. The Winthrop Spring Investment Luncheon was always an extravagant affair, held in a sprawling glass conservatory, where manicured rose gardens met rare orchids flown in from Holland. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms moved like shadows through sunlight, and a string quartet played a muted Vivaldi medley beneath hanging chandeliers. It was a display of old money power. Polished. Perfect. Pretentious. And I was walking straight into the lion's den. Only this time, the lion didn't know his cage had been unlocked. I arrived at 11:03 a.m., precisely 3 minutes late, just enough to make people notice. Gabriel Lancaster walked beside me, his presence enough to tilt the gravitational pull of the room. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Some rose instinctively to greet him, eyes flickering toward me in confusion. That's when it began. Charles Winthrop stood across the atrium, deep in conversation with two banking executives. When he saw Gabriel, he smiled wide, but when his eyes landed on me, the corners of his mouth froze. He hadn't invited me. Yet here I was, wearing a three-piece navy suit and a wristwatch that had once belonged to the founder of one of my companies, a gift given after I saved them from bankruptcy. Charles moved forward, extending a hand to Gabriel. "Mr. Lancaster, a pleasure as always." Gabriel smiled thinly. "Charles." Then, as if performing surgery, he turned slightly and gestured toward me. "You know Raymond Caldwell, of course. My co-lead on the Sovereign Biotech deal." Charles blinked. Of course." He lied. "Poorly. I didn't realize you two had a working relationship," he added, stiff. Gabriel chuckled. "Working relationship? Charles, Raymond and I built 2 unicorns together. I trust him more than I trust half my portfolio managers." Charles looked like he'd swallowed glass. I gave him a polite smile, the kind that says I remember everything you've ever said, and today is your invoice. We took our seats at the long central table. I was placed directly opposite Charles. Gabriel to my right. To my left, the editor of Denver Financial Weekly, who had written a glowing profile about me just 2 weeks earlier. Coincidence? Hardly. Over the next hour, polite conversation gave way to pitching. Charles stood at the head of the table, delivering a presentation about legacy wealth stabilization and next-generation investment strategies. He was in his element, commanding the room with hollow confidence. Until the final slide. He paused. And now, I'd like to announce an exclusive partnership initiative, with none other than Lancaster Global Capital. Murmurs spread around the table. Gabriel tilted his head. That's interesting, he said. I don't recall confirming anything yet. Charles's face tightened. We spoke about this last month. We did, Gabriel agreed. But I never agreed to tie Lancaster Global Capital to Winthrop Holdings. In fact, as of this morning, we're formally aligning with Caldwell Equity Group. Gasps. No one had seen it coming. Charles looked at me. Caldwell Equity, is that? Yes, I replied, folding my hands. That's my firm. We've been quietly securing relationships with your partners and suppliers over the last few months. Charles sat down hard, visibly rattled. I turned to the room. I'd like to announce the launch of the Legacy Resurgence Fund, focused on revitalizing aging companies through ethical leadership, agile capital, and mutual respect. The jab wasn't subtle. The applause that followed wasn't forced. After the luncheon, Charles caught up with me near the terrace overlooking the gardens. You orchestrated this, he hissed. You waited. No, I interrupted. I endured. His jaw tightened. You mocked me. You humiliated me. You called me a freeloader, publicly, twice. While I was quietly building the financial backbone of half this room. I didn't know, he said, voice trembling. No, I said calmly. You didn't care. He looked away. I'm not here to destroy you, Charles. That would be easy. But I am here to correct you. From this point forward, when you think of Raymond Caldwell, I want you to remember that the man you dismissed is now the one your company depends on to survive. He swallowed hard. Then, I handed him a card, sleek, matte black, embossed with gold. Raymond Caldwell, Managing Partner, Caldwell Equity Group. Now accepting legacy partnership proposals. His hand shook as he took it. Have your assistant reach out, I added with a cold smile. I'll see what I can do. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadow of everything he thought he controlled. I thought that was the peak. That I had finally leveled the score. Charles Winthrop had been publicly humbled. I'd taken control of the narrative, built a legacy on my own terms, and earned back every ounce of respect that had been stripped from me, without ever raising my voice. But life has a way of dealing an extra card when the game seems finished. A week after the luncheon, I received a call that changed everything. It was from Douglas Ferris, one of Charles's oldest business allies, a man whose handshake once secured an $80 million manufacturing deal for the Winthrop Group. Raymond, he said gravely, can we talk in person? I met him at a discreet corner table at the Denver Petroleum Club. No fanfare. Just black coffee and tension. What's going on? I asked. Ferris looked around before leaning in. I thought you should know. Charles is preparing to fight back. Not in public. Quietly. Legally. I frowned. Fight what? He's setting you up. I froze. What do you mean? He's been digging through your wife's financials. Apparently, Helena's trust fund was tapped, twice, during your early years of investing. Charles is building a narrative that you used Winthrop money to bankroll your early deals. If he can prove that, well, he plans to accuse you of fraud and breach of family fiduciary trust. I went cold. That was years ago. Helena had offered to cover part of a seed round when one of my first companies needed a bridge investment. It had been documented. Above board. Even gifted later. But in the wrong hands, twisted just right. It could look criminal. He's trying to destroy your credibility, Ferris added. He knows you've outplayed him in public. So now. He's coming for your foundation. It all hit me at once. I had been so focused on winning the public battle, I didn't guard the private front. And the worst part? If Charles succeeded, it wouldn't just ruin me. It would destroy Helena, too. Her trust fund was still connected to the company's holding structures. If Charles poisoned the narrative, Helena could be dragged into a war she didn't even see coming. Her name. Her business. Her entire financial future. I had fought this war for my dignity, but I was not going to let it end with her being collateral damage. No. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was war. That night, I went back through every record. Every transfer. Every document. I pulled in my legal team, my auditors, even a retired federal compliance officer who owed me a favor from years back. And that's when I uncovered the real twist. It wasn't just Helena's trust that had been tapped years ago. Charles had done it, too. 3 years ago, he'd borrowed from Helena's trust, without her knowledge, to cover a debt linked to a failed international investment. The documents were buried deep in layers of corporate shielding. But the paper trail was there. He thought no one would ever find it. He was wrong. By the end of the week, I had what I needed. Verified statements showing I repaid every cent Helena invested into my companies, plus interest. Gift transfer receipt signed by Helena, dated and notarized. And confidential documentation showing that Charles had illegally withdrawn over $2.3 million from Helena's fund to cover a loss tied to a Chinese textile venture. I could bury him. But I didn't, yet. Instead, I scheduled a private meeting with him at his office. No attorneys. No cameras. Just us. When I walked in, Charles was calm. Too calm. I assume you know why I asked you here, I said, dropping a file folder onto his desk. He didn't touch it. I assume you're here to negotiate, he said, smug. You've had your fun, Raymond. But you forget who built this world. Who has the connections to bury you in the right courtrooms, the right rooms. I smiled. Is that what you think? He didn't answer. I leaned forward. Charles, that folder contains the full report of your illegal withdrawal from Helena's trust. Including the offshore transaction logs, dated wire transfers, and internal memos. His face paled. And here's the thing, I continued, voice flat. I'm not going to the press. I'm going to Helena. That broke him. No, he whispered. Yes. You can't, she doesn't know. It was a temporary. It was theft. He sank into his chair. She stood by you, Charles. Even after everything. She defended you. Cried over you. And you stole from her. You tried to blame me, when you were the one bleeding your own daughter's future to cover your mistakes. I stood up. You want to talk about legacies? Yours ends here, unless you do exactly what I say. He looked up, eyes full of defeat. What do you want? He croaked. Charles Winthrop slumped behind his massive oak desk like a man who had finally realized his empire wasn't made of marble, but glass. I'll do what you ask, he muttered. Just, don't tell Helena. I paused, my hand on the doorframe. She deserves to know the truth, Charles. You've lied to her for years. You nearly destroyed both of us to protect your ego. You don't get to hide behind her love anymore. He looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly speechless. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he had nothing left. That evening, I sat down with Helena in our living room. Fire crackling. A silence between us so heavy it felt alive. There's something you need to see, I said, sliding the file across the table. She looked at it, confused, then slowly opened the folder. Her eyes moved over the pages, one by one. Dates. Transfers. Signatures. Her hands began to shake. "He took from my trust?" she asked, voice breaking. "Without telling me?" I nodded. "I found out when he tried to accuse me of taking from yours. He planned to claim I built my fund off your money. He wanted to ruin me to save himself." Helena stood, backing away from the folder like it might burn her. "And I defended him," she whispered. "All those years, I thought he was just hard on you. But he's a liar." She looked at me, eyes welling with tears. "And I'm so sorry, Raymond. I should have seen it sooner. I should have stood by you." I stood up and took her hands in mine. "You did," I said gently. "You're here now." She looked at me with an intensity one hadn't seen since the day we got married. "What are you going to do?" "I already did it," I replied. I gave him a choice. The terms were simple. Charles would step down from the board of Winthrop Holdings, effective immediately. Helena would inherit his seat, and I would be her senior financial advisor with full proxy voting power. And most importantly, Charles would publicly announce that he had requested my help to save the company. A full reversal. From freeloader to savior. The press release went live the following morning. Charles Winthrop steps down, names daughter Helena as successor, thanks Raymond Caldwell for leadership during crisis. The accompanying photo showed Charles, pale and stiff, standing beside Helena and me. You could practically smell the shame radiating off the screen. Investors applauded the move. Stock stabilized. And Helena, despite the pain, rose to the occasion like she was born for it. Charles. He vanished into quiet obscurity. A man whose legacy crumbled because he built it on pride. Months later. Spring had softened into summer. The Winthrop estate no longer hosted galas, it held board meetings, where Helena and I now discussed ESG strategies and emerging tech portfolios. I still ran my own firm, but I sat in on Winthrop calls, helped restructure their departments, and negotiated on Helena's behalf. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting, Helena and I stood by the garden where the first luncheon was held. The roses had started blooming again. "You could have ruined him," she said softly. "You had everything you needed." "I did," I replied. "So why didn't you?" I looked at her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Because this wasn't about revenge," I said. "It was about truth. About respect. About reminding your family, and maybe even myself, that dignity isn't something anyone can give or take away. You claim it." She smiled, eyes shimmering. "And because I wanted you to have something better than a burned-down legacy," I added. "I wanted you to lead it." Today, the Winthrop name stands tall again, but for different reasons. Integrity. Transparency. Progress. And I no longer walk into rooms wondering if I belong. I own the room. Not with noise. Not with ego. But with quiet, undeniable truth. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from revenge. It comes from the day your enemy finally has to call you boss. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.